Hey, deep divers, welcome back. Before we get started, if you enjoy this deep dive, please do us a favor and hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and leave us a comment. It really helps us out. All right, so today we're diving into something that honestly sounds like it's straight out of a sci-fi thriller, but it's actually all too real. We're talking Elon Musk, Starlink, and a twist in the Russia-Ukraine war that'll leave you wondering, what just happened?
Yeah, what's really wild is how this whole situation has completely flipped on its head.
Right.
You remember the early days of the invasion?
Yeah.
Ukraine was totally outgunned and outmanned.
They were.
But they had this one ace up their sleeve,
Yeah.
Starlink.
That was huge.
It was.
Musk swooped in, provided all those Starlink terminals, and all of a sudden, Ukrainian soldiers were connected, coordinated. It was almost like they had this secret weapon.
Yeah.
Everyone was praising Musk as the tech savior of Ukraine.
Mm-hmm.
But then things got a little weird.
Yeah, it's like the hero narrative unraveled pretty quickly. Reports started surfacing that Musk was having these regular conversations with Putin.
Whoa.
And the Ukrainians, they started getting suspicious, and understandably so, right?
Right.
And then the Wall Street Journal drops this bombshell report about these conversations. It really just added fuel to the fire.
Okay, wait. Back up for a second. Regular chats with Putin.
Mm.
In the middle of a war where he's supplying technology to the other side.
Yeah.
That's a choice.
It definitely raised some eyebrows.
Yeah.
And then, as if things couldn't get any more complicated, we find out that Russian forces are now using Starlink, too. We're talking thousands of terminals in captured Ukrainian territory.
Hold on. They're under sanctions, right?
Right.
How are they getting their hands on all these Starlink terminals? Is Musk secretly sending them care packages or something?
No, not quite.
Okay.
It seems like they're acquiring these terminals through third-party countries, basically finding ways to go around the sanctions.
Oh, okay.
Think of it like, buying something online from a reseller because the original store won't ship to your country.
Okay. So they're finding loopholes. Sneaky.
Mm.
But what does this actually mean for the war on the ground? What kind of impact are these Starlink terminals having?
Well, it's basically allowing Russia to close that tech gap that Starlink initially created for Ukraine.
Mm.
You remember those early days when Ukraine was relying so heavily on Starlink for communication and coordination?
Yeah.
Well, now the Russians are doing the same thing, particularly in their offensive in the Donetsk region.
So what was once this clear advantage for Ukraine has now become a tool that both sides are using. That is a crazy plot twist.
Exactly. And this isn't just some interesting technological quirk, right? This situation raises some really big questions about the role of private tech companies in modern warfare. Where do their allegiances lie? And what about the unintended consequences of these incredible innovations they're creating?
Yeah, it really makes you think. Can a company like SpaceX actually stay neutral when its technology is being used in a war zone? It's almost like trying to stay out of an argument while you're handing both sides baseball bats.
It's definitely a complicated situation. There's no easy answers. And it gets even more tangled when we start talking about drones.
Drones? Oh, you mean those Iranian-made Shahed drones that Russia's been using?
Yeah, those.
I was just reading this report in Defense Express about how one of these downed Shahed drones actually had Starlink components in it. What's going on with that?
Well, that's where things get even more interesting, because it seems like Russia is figuring out ways to actually integrate Starlink into their drone program. And, from their perspective, why wouldn't they? We're talking about potentially giving these drones longer range communication, better reconnaissance capabilities, maybe even the ability to redirect them mid-flight.
So they're basically hacking the system to improve their own weaponry. And to think, there were reports that Musk actually prohibited Ukraine from using Starlink for their own attack drone operations.
Right.
It's almost like this game of technological one-upmanship.
It really highlights the inherent difficulty of trying to control how a technology is used once it's out there in the world, right? Musk might have drawn a line for Ukraine, but obviously Russia's playing by a very different set of rules.
This is getting crazy. We've gone from Starlink being hailed as this savior for Ukraine to it potentially becoming a key asset in Russia's drone warfare.
What a wild ride. So what does this mean for the future of Starlink in this conflict?
Well, that's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
Yeah.
Will SpaceX try to actively disrupt the Russians' access to Starlink? Or will they choose to maintain, a neutral stance And how is all of this going to impact SpaceX's reputation and its future business dealings?
These are some seriously heavy questions, and we'll dig into them after a quick break. Don't go anywhere. So, before the break, we were just talking about the big question mark hanging over SpaceX, right? Like, will they actually try to stop the Russians from using Starlink, or are they just going to stay out of it completely? It's a super tricky situation, no doubt.
It really is because, we know that SpaceX actually can monitor how Starlink's being used.
Yeah.
And they can even mess with it, right? Like, they've done that before.
Exactly. They've shown that they have the ability to restrict certain features, especially when it comes to, these kinds of military applications. Like, remember how they reportedly put limits on how Ukraine could use Starlink for those attack drone operations?
Right, right. So theoretically, they could do the same thing to the Russians to disrupt their operations, couldn't they? Especially since we know that Russia has these specific launch areas for those Shahed drones. Couldn't SpaceX just, cut off their Starlink connection right at the source?
Yeah, that's definitely one possibility. I mean, if SpaceX can pinpoint those Starlink connections that are coming from those Shahed launch sites, they could, potentially sever those connections before the drones even take off. That would really throw a wrench in their plans.
Yeah, it would. But here's the thing. Would SpaceX actually do that? I mean, they're a business, right? They're not a military force. And they've been pretty quiet about, taking sides in this whole conflict.
And that's the heart of the dilemma. They're walking this tightrope.
Yeah.
Because if they do take action against Russia, it could look like they're siding with Ukraine. And that could really hurt their business relationships and future opportunities in Russia.
Totally. And remember, the Daily Beast reached out to SpaceX to try to get a comment about all this, and got crickets. They didn't say anything.
Yeah.
But that silence, I don't know, it feels kind of deafening to me.
Yeah. That definitely adds to the mystery. Maybe they're hesitant to, get dragged into the political mess of this war. Or maybe they're just weighing their options behind the scenes, trying to figure out what's the best way to move forward.
So basically, we're left with a ton of unanswered questions.
Mm-hmm.
Will SpaceX step in and try to block Russia from using Starlink?
Yeah.
Or will they just choose to stay on the sidelines, even though, their technology is potentially fueling this conflict?
Those are the million-dollar questions.
Hmm.
And the answers are going to determine what role Starlink is going to play in this war. And, the impact of those answers is going to go way beyond Ukraine. It's going to impact the way we all think about how private tech companies should act in future conflicts.
Yeah, absolutely. Because this isn't just about Starlink in Ukraine anymore, right? This is about setting a precedent. It's about figuring out, what are the rules of the road for how we deal with these super powerful technologies in warfare, especially when those technologies are in the hands of private companies.
Exactly. This whole situation really forces us to grapple with some tough ethical questions. Can a company like SpaceX truly stay neutral when its technology is being used in a war zone? Do they have a responsibility to make sure that their inventions aren't being used to hurt people?
Those are such tough questions, and there are no easy answers. But this is a conversation that we, as a society, really need to be having.
Yeah.
Because the lines between the private sector and the military, they're getting blurrier all the time. And we need to figure out how to navigate this new landscape responsibly.
Yeah, we're basically in uncharted territory. The old rules of warfare, they just don't apply the same way anymore because technology is changing so fast. And these private companies, with all their incredible technological power, they're playing a bigger and bigger role.
It's kind of both exciting and terrifying, right? Because the potential for innovation is limitless. But at the same time, so is the potential for someone to misuse that innovation. It feels like we're constantly playing catch-up ethically and legally, just trying to figure out how to manage these powerful new technologies before they get completely out of control.
That's a really great point. We're in this constant race to keep up with the insane pace of technological change. And the challenge isn't just about creating new tech, it's also about developing those ethical frameworks, those regulations, to make sure that these technologies are used responsibly, for good, for the betterment of humanity.
That's a tall order. But it's one that we just can't afford to ignore. The stakes are way too high. The future of warfare, maybe even the future of our world, depends on us getting this right.
It's a call to action for all of us, policymakers, industry leaders, academics, everyday citizens. We all have a part to play in shaping the future of technology and making sure that it's a force for good, not a force for destruction.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
Yeah.
We've covered a lot of ground today. We started with the amazement of seeing Starlink's impact in Ukraine. And now we're here facing this unsettling reality that this technology is being used by both sides in this conflict. and it's raising all these ethical and strategic questions.
Yeah, we've seen how quickly a technological innovation can get ahead of our ability to actually understand the consequences, especially in a war. And we've explored just how complicated it is to try to control how a technology is used once it's out in the world.
It's a stark reminder that we live in a world where the lines between innovation, warfare, and ethics are getting blurrier and blurrier every single day. And it's up to us as a global community to really grapple with these complex issues and try to build a future where technology is used for good, not for destruction.
We need to have these conversations now, while these technologies are still relatively new, while we still have a chance to really influence their trajectory. We need to think about the long-term consequences of our actions and make sure we're not just like sleepwalking into a future that we'll regret later.
So deep divers, what do you think? What should SpaceX do in this situation? Can they really stay neutral? Or do they have like a moral obligation to step in? Is it even possible to control how technology is used once it's out in the world? Hit us up in the comments. Let's get this conversation going.
This story is still unfolding, right? And the decisions that are made by SpaceX, by other tech companies in these coming months and years, they're going to have a huge impact. It's a reminder that we're all stakeholders in this rapidly evolving technological landscape. And we need to be actively involved in shaping the future that we want to see.
And that's a wrap on this deep dive into that tangled web of Starlink, Elon Musk, and the Russia-Ukraine war. Don't forget to hit that like button if you found this deep dive insightful, and subscribe to the channel for more thought-provoking content. Be sure to share your thoughts and perspectives in the comments below. Until next time, deep divers, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep diving deep. It's a lot to wrap your head around, isn't it? I mean, you've got this technology that was designed to connect people, and now it's being used in a war, and potentially even like making some pretty scary weapons even more powerful.
Yeah, it's a real-life example of how technology can be this like double-edged sword. And what makes it even more mind-boggling is that SpaceX hasn't really said anything publicly about all this.
Right. Like, no official statements, no explanations, nothing.
Nope. They've been totally silent about how they plan to handle this situation, or if they even plan to handle it.
It's almost like they're stuck between a rock and a hard place.
Oh.
Because on the one hand, they've got this super powerful technology that could actually, like, shift the entire balance of the war.
Mm-hmm.
But on the other hand, they're a private company. They've got business interests that they need to protect.
Exactly. It's a situation where there are no easy answers. And it all circles back to those bigger questions we were talking about earlier, about the role of these private tech companies in modern warfare. Like, what's their responsibility when it comes to making sure their technology isn't being used to hurt people?
Yeah, that's the big question, right? Do they have some sort of, like, moral obligation to step in and do something?
Mm-hmm.
Or is that a slippery slope that could lead to them getting tangled up in all these conflicts that they never signed up for?
And even if they wanted to step in and do something, is it even possible to control how technology is used once it's out there in the world? Like, think about it. People are always going to find creative workarounds. They're going to exploit loopholes.
It's like trying to stuff a genie back into a bottle.
Yeah.
Once the technology is out there, it's out there, and that just creates a whole other set of problems for the people who are trying to make the rules, for the people trying to regulate all this, because technology is moving so fast.
Absolutely. It's a super complicated landscape, and figuring out how to navigate it requires like a deep understanding of not just the technology itself, but also the ethical implications of how it's being used. And this isn't just a problem for governments to solve or for corporations to solve. It's something that we all need to be thinking about.
So, deep divers, we're throwing this one back to you. What do you think SpaceX should do? Can they really just stay neutral in all of this, or do they have to take a stand? Is it even possible to control how these powerful technologies are used in a world where the line between innovation and warfare is getting more and more blurred every single day?
We want to hear your thoughts. Let's keep this conversation going. Drop a comment below and tell us what you think.
And that's a wrap on our deep dive into Starlink, Elon Musk, and all the crazy twists and turns of technology in the Russia-Ukraine war. If you found this deep dive insightful, make sure you hit that like button and subscribe to the channel for more deep dives just like this one. And most importantly, keep those brains buzzing. We'll see you next time.